Prof, good morning. Thank you very much. I don't think this report is telling us something that we should not have expected. And I'm just saying this very briefly against the background of all these reports we saw during the hard lockdowns around the world in order to stem the spread of the coronavirus pandemic, that people were so excited to get back to normal, whatever that means.
Yes, that's correct. So this is a report. It's called United in Science 2020, and it was put out by a number of organizations to capture the latest in climate change science. And one of the messages from that report was that although we had these confinement measures, these lockdown measures that did bring down greenhouse gas emissions, they, at the lowest point in April 2020, they were only down to our 2006 greenhouse gas emissions. And that it's made a very little difference to the trajectory of increased greenhouse gas emissions. And that we are still increasing our greenhouse gas emissions, with 2019 being a record year, 36 gigatons of carbon emitted into the atmosphere.
Now, I mean, the report is highlighting the trend in terms of, but all people must remember is that the impacts of what has been happening already are really might not be or are really irreversible. Am I right?
Well, it's quite difficult to ascertain irreversibility. I mean, this report highlights changes to the cryosphere, which is the extent to which the frozen parts of the Earth. So glaciers have been melting at a rate of about 1 square meter a year, loss of 1 square meter a year globally, and then the loss of ice sheets. So those are potentially irreversible impacts. So, for example, one of the statistics is that in the Arctic Sea, if you look at the sea ice there, 95% of that is younger than 5 years. So those changes in the cryosphere are very concerning because they have knock-on effects to the oceans, and there's all sorts of feedback mechanisms to the atmosphere and then on ecosystems and then on human systems. So we really have to do something now. This is the message of the report. Transformational change is no longer an option.
And it's not like we have not known that, Prof. We've known the need for urgent action and sustainable action. I mean, you mentioned the glaciers, the ice sheets which are melting, therefore rising sea levels. And we're seeing, because of that, we are seeing extreme weather events. I was just watching the news the other day on these fires that are raging in California. And we see these wildfires. And then, of course, there's flooding and there's drought. And here in South Africa, we had the worst drought in over 30 years recently. So it's all linked. And somehow in our daily lives, we don't seem to get the connection.
Yes, and that's the difference between the climate change emergency and the COVID emergency. So the COVID, we see the deaths. We have these worldometer counting the deaths, and it was amazing to me how quickly governments took action and drastic action to confine people to their homes to deal with this threat. But the problem with the climate change emergency is that it takes place over a long space of time on a massive scale. But this is the point at which we experience it through these natural disasters of fires and droughts and floods. And here in Southern Africa, the main impact is going to be water stress. One of the concerning statistics that this report highlights is that over the next 5-year period, 2020 to 2024, Southern Africa is likely to be drier. So that is something we're going to need to prepare for.
Are we preparing for those kind of natural, so to speak, disasters? Because by the way we behave, it looks like we say, it's still coming, we'll deal with it then.
Well, I think South Africa has a lot of experience in managing droughts, but what is of concern is that we do not seem to be protecting our strategic water source areas. So there's a very limited land area in our country where our water resources are generated from, the catchment areas. And we are still, in some areas, planning to mine coal in these areas. So, the protection of our strategic water source areas is absolutely critical. We should be focusing, and then looking at drought assistance measures going forward.
Yeah. Is there anything that's sort of like make you smile when you read this report in terms of a positive to say, oh, at least there's something else that looks good? Because when I look at the highlights of this United in Science 2020 report, I mean, all of the key findings are just telling us we're in trouble.
Okay, so the one thing that I found to be very hopeful was the rate of increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So between 2000 and 2010, the rate of increase of greenhouse gas emissions was 3% per year. This has slowed between 2010 and 2019 to about 1% a year. So even though our greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, they're increasing at a slower rate. So I think that's hopeful. And the report did say that there might, this does possibly signal a decline on the horizon. But what we need to meet the Paris Agreement's goals of a temperature change not greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius globally on average is reductions per year of 3 to 7%. So we're not yet reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. They have slowed, but we need far more drastic cuts.
Prof, thank you very much for your time and insights this morning. We need to act, and we need to act now. We've heard that before, and that call is practicable and applicable every single day as we go forward into the future.